Have you ever heard of men's issues? Probably not. They're often covered up by strong forces like male chivalry. How can you have issues if you're busy sacrificing for others? Then there's misandry, which devalues men and sees them as disposable. Then there's the rigid, ancient, unchanged male sex role of provide and protect. When you provide and protect others, who's providing and protecting for you? And on top of all these is a healthy dose of political correctness, which allows a focus on women's vulnerabilities but censors men's. Let's blow this stuff and get a good look at some men's issues. People often assume that men's issues are all about power, but really they're about death and emotional pain. In our culture, a man's emotional pain is taboo. War dead, 98% men. Imagine if that number were any other group. There'd be outrage. Men are disposable. Uncle Sam only forces the boys to sign up for selective service, and if they don't, it's a $250,000 fine and or 5 years in prison. Suicide is 80% men and boys. Men comprise 93% of all workplace deaths. Men die 5 years earlier than women, and they die earlier and more often from every major cause of death. Doesn't it seem odd that the U.S. government focuses on women's health and doesn't have a single national office for men's health issues? Over 1 million baby boys undergo painful, destructive, and unnecessary circumcisions each year. All circumcisions of girls are against the law, without exceptions for cultural or religious practices. When families divorce and custody is contested, mothers get sole custody 83% of the time, while fathers get sole custody 8%. David Harris, John Bobbitt, and Matthew Winkler. These are names of men who were victims of domestic violence and were killed or maimed by their female partners. This happens more often than people think. Research tells us that men comprise 38% of the injured victims of domestic violence, but receive none of the billions of dollars of services offered to women. Reproductive rights? Men have none. Her body, her choice. His wallet, her choice. Men are all too often put in the agonizing position of wanting the child, but having to stand by helplessly as the child is aborted. He has no rights. Paternity fraud is when the mother falsely names a man to be the biological father and pay for her child, even though the mother knows or suspects that he's not really the biological father. So we have a biological mother, a baby, and a duped dad. The real father? He's not even in the picture. This leaves a family living a lie and is particularly hurtful to the men and their children. Studies have shown that of those using DNA to check for paternity, about 30% turn out to be duped dads. That's a lot of lies. Male bashing. It's everywhere you look. Let's take a couple of examples of male bashing featuring sexual violence against men in commercials. The first is a FedEx commercial where Burt Reynolds is kicked in the crotch by a bear. It's meant to be funny, and in some ways it is. However, just imagine that the person being kicked was a woman. Would it still be as funny? The next is Justin Timberlake, who takes repeated blows to the crotch while being run into a mailbox. Would it have been funny if Justin had been a female? Probably not. Sexual violence against women is a crime. Sexual violence against men is funny. Men are expendable and women are to be protected. False accusations. Research shows us that over 40% of accusations of rape are false. Yet we do very little to protect our young men from false imprisonment. The majority of those freed by the Innocence Project after being wrongly imprisoned had been accused of rape. Sentencing disparity. Gender is the most significant biasing factor in determining whether or not someone will be criminally charged, prosecuted, indicted, and sentenced, as well as determining the severity of the sentence. Research shows us that female criminals get lighter sentences than men. In bank robbery, women get 20% smaller sentences, which is double the well-publicized bias due to race. Our culture tends to see males who have committed crimes as evil and in need of punishment. We tend to see women as incapable of evil and will search for excuses for females who have committed crimes. Often the excuses have to do with mental illness and or having been abused as a child. Let's summarize the men's issues we've touched on so far. War dead, selective service, suicide, workplace, longevity and health, divorce custody, domestic violence, reproductive rights, circumcision, paternity fraud, male bashing, false accusations, sentencing disparity. We've still left out some important issues such as Title IX, which has killed over 800 men's college sports teams. Disparity in health funding, where female-specific health issues receive far more funding than male-specific problems. Boys in schools, where boys are lagging in achievements and in college enrollment and graduation, and our legislators sit on their hands. The lack of male-friendly men's studies courses in college and universities to give our young men understanding and ownership of the many good things about being male. This is just an introduction into the way our societal forces of chivalry, misandry, and provide and protect focus energy and resources on women's needs while obscuring and ignoring the needs of men. If you'd like to learn more about these issues and lend a hand in bringing balance to a sexist system, have a look at the following web resources. This video was created 10 years ago. Sadly, during that time, very little has changed, and some things have even gotten worse. The video continues to accurately depict our gynocentric cultural failure to address the needs of boys and men. In that 10-year span, nearly 50,000 men in the U.S. have died on the job. That's a man's death on the job about every 2 hours. An estimated 300,000 men have committed suicide in the last 10 years, and that's a man's death every 15 minutes. There have been millions of men during that time who've been removed from their families and their children by corrupt family courts through no fault of their own. And there have been 10 million boys who've undergone circumcisions. That's a boy being genitally mutilated every 30 seconds. And still, we do nothing. On a positive note, we now have a documentary that illustrates much of what is briefly touched on in this video, The Red Pill. Please do make a point to see it and tell your friends about it. And let's not forget, men are good.